When we think of innovation and technology, we usually associate smaller with newer. After all, our phones, computers, and televisions are all getting thinner, lighter, and faster as we improve them. One area that doesn't really apply is the world of aircraft. Rather than go small, humans have always been trying to make things bigger. More engines, bigger wings, and more cargo. All of this adds up to some pretty hefty airplanes that, incredibly, actually make it off the ground. Before we get started, we wanted to give a big shout out to our friends at The Wacky. They produce amazing videos, so make sure to check out their channel after this video. Blohm and Voss BV-238. While the airplane has been around for more than 100 years, perhaps the one period in our history that saw its greatest leap in development was the Second World War. During this bloody conflict, each country put considerable time and effort into building all sorts of new aircraft and pushing the limits of technology. One result of this effort was to make planes bigger, faster, and more powerful than the rest was the Blohm and Voss BV-238. Developed by Nazi Germany, the BV-238 first flew in 1944, becoming the heaviest aircraft ever made to that point in human history. It also set the record for the largest plane ever developed by the Axis powers during the war. Weighing in at a hefty 60 tons when empty, the BV-238 was truly impressive because it was also a flying boat, meaning it could take off and land on water. Armed with over 20 machine guns and an assortment of bombs and missiles, this huge floating plane is said to have had a maximum weight of 100 tons. With all that weight, it's no wonder the designers built this thing with 6 engines. H-4 Hercules. During World War II, American planners were really worried about the number of ships getting sunk by German submarines. Their solution? Build a huge plane that could fly cargo across the Atlantic, thus avoiding the U-boats. One major catch was that it couldn't use a lot of aluminum because America's war industry needed it. The eccentric pilot, businessman, and philanthropist Howard Hughes took up the challenge and designed a monstrous flying boat that was built primarily from birch. Known as the H-4 Hercules, most people remember Hughes's plane simply as the Spruce Goose. The H-4 failed to get into the war, and only one was ever built and flown in 1947. Nonetheless, this thing was impressive. Its 320-foot wingspan and 8 massive engines dwarf pretty much anything that flies today. Weighing 125 tons empty, the Spruce Goose was designed to carry another 75 tons of cargo, which could have come in the form of 750 soldiers or 2 Sherman tanks. Considering the plane was built from wood and flew 70 years ago, we think that's a pretty impressive feat. B-52. When it comes to the heaviest current American bomber, it's a very close contest between the B-1 Lancer and the B-52 Stratofortress. In fact, while the B-1 is heavier when empty, the B-52 is bigger in a few other ways. This iconic Cold War bomber has represented the backbone of the US bomber fleet for decades. Interestingly, the last B-52 rolled off the assembly line in 1962. That means the crews that fly and operate the Stratofortress today weren't even born when the plane they operate was made. Some could even be flying the same plane their grandfather flew decades ago. At nearly 160 feet in length and with a wingspan of 185 feet, the 50-year-old B-52 is dimensionally the biggest bomber in the US fleet. Loaded with fuel and 35 tons of bombs and missiles, and the B-52 can achieve a maximum weight of around 240 tons, which is several more than the far newer B-1. With all those weapons, we're guessing whoever finds themselves on the receiving end of a Stratofortress is going to have a bad day. Antonov An-124. When we wanted to include a large production model cargo plane in our video, we first looked at the massive C-5 Galaxy. Unfortunately, this big American plane was bumped in favor of an even bigger model built by the Ukrainian company Antonov. Up until a decade ago, the An-124 Ruslan was the largest mass-produced aircraft. Despite losing that crown, because many An-124s operate in various military forces around the world, the Ruslan holds the title of the largest military cargo aircraft in service. This plane was developed in the former Soviet Union out of a need for a heavy cargo aircraft. As you can see, it's definitely a big plane. The An-124 weighs in at around 190 tons empty. Fill its double decks full of cargo and troops, and this thing has a maximum takeoff weight of well over 400 tons. In order to take off and land, this thing has 4 massive jet engines and sits on 24 landing gear wheels, which are needed to handle all that weight. The An-124 is such an impressive cargo plane that NATO countries actually leased some to help haul equipment during operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. Junkers Ju-390. If you were to ask most people what the largest and heaviest land-based aircraft of the Second World War was, we bet they wouldn't respond with the Junkers Ju-390. No, instead you'd hear responses like the Avro Lancaster or likely the B-29 Superfortress. However, with a wingspan of 165 feet and an empty weight of 43 tons, the Ju-390 beats them all. Raise the discussion to include maximum weight, and this German bomber and reconnaissance plane's 80-plus tons trumps them all again. The Ju-390 was developed as part of a project to build a bomber that could strike New York from Europe. Obviously, such a bomber needed to be pretty big, and the Ju-390's 6 engines ensured the potential to get to the target and back again. Fortunately for the Allies, only 2 of these planes were ever built before the war ended, and they never bombed New York. There are, however, rumors and unsubstantiated reports that a Ju-390 did make a secret flight to within 19 miles of the US coastline during a 32-hour flight in 1944. While plausible, without photo or document evidence, it remains highly unlikely that this ever occurred. Alright, time to take an in-flight break to answer our quiz. Every day, airlines fly millions of people all over the world. Do you know which active non-stop route is currently the biggest in terms of distance traveled and time spent in the air? We'll give you the answer after we show you a few more monstrous airplanes. XB-70. In the 1950s, America was deep in the Cold War and working to develop new technologies that could be used if a hot war broke out with the Soviet Union. Thanks to technological advancements in design and engine power, work began on a bomber which could fly at Mach 3 at 70,000 feet. To the planners at that time, this was fast enough and high enough to avoid any Russian defenses. Designers came up with a prototype bomber known as the XB-70 Valkyrie. In addition to its impressive performance specifications, the Valkyrie, when fully loaded, tipped the scales at over 260 tons. In order to get something so heavy to fly so fast, designers incorporated 6 powerful jet engines. So, what happened to this Ferrari of the sky? American government officials and planners realized in the 1960s that even a Mach 3 bomber could be easily shot down by missiles over the Soviet Union. Furthermore, for the taxpayers, ICBMs were a much cheaper and effective way to strike at an enemy in the event of a nuclear war. As a result, the massive Valkyrie never left the prototype stage. Tupolev Tu-160 White Swan. When the US canceled the Valkyrie, they turned their attention to the B-1 Lancer. This plane caught the attention of Soviet designers who moved to create their own advanced nuclear strike bomber. The end result was the Tupolev Tu-160 White Swan. Known in the West as the Blackjack, superficially the Tu-160 looked like the B-1, but it was much bigger in every way. First, this Russian bomber can fly at over Mach 2. Its wings are enormous and stretch 189 feet. Then there's its sheer weight. This Swan is pretty hefty with a maximum takeoff weight of 300 tons. Of that weight, up to 44 tons can be stored inside in the form of bombs and cruise missiles. Overall, this makes the Tu-160 the largest and heaviest supersonic and combat aircraft ever. In fact, in terms of records, the only one the Blackjack misses out on is the longest, with the cancelled Valkyrie holding that distinction. Today, there are said to be 16 of these very capable planes in Russian service. If recent rumors and reports are to be believed, then it's likely Russia could place the massive White Swan back in production in the very near future. Antonov AN-225. A little while back, we mentioned the AN-124 as being the largest production cargo plane in the world. If you found this plane's size impressive, then wait until you get a load of its much bigger brother, the AN-225. Known as the Miria, to the casual observer, this plane looks like a regular AN-124, only with a couple extra engines. It's actually quite a bit bigger. At 275 feet long and sporting a 290-foot wingspan, this cargo plane is currently the biggest operational plane. If its dimensions don't impress, then there's always the AN-225's sheer weight. Even empty, this thing weighs in at 225 tons. Pack it full of fuel, passengers, and cargo, and its maximum weight rises to an incredible 640 tons. So, why on earth would you need something this large? Well, the AN-225 was designed at a time when the Soviet Union needed something really big to carry its rockets and space orbiters around. With no need for that anymore, it has found use hauling very large cargoes all around the world. For instance, in 2001, it proved its ability by carrying 4 combat tanks with a weight of nearly 280 tons. Recently, there have been strong rumors that both Russia and China are interested in resuming the construction of these giants of the sky. EKRANOPLAN KM. It may not be the biggest. Come to think of it, this might not even technically be an airplane, but we just have to include it. Until the huge AN-225, the Soviet EKRANOPLAN KM was the heaviest thing that flew. Developed and built in the 1960s, the Caspian Sea Monster was a ground effects vehicle that flew close to the surface of the water using scientific principles we don't have time to get into here. Using 8 to 10 jet engines, this strange-looking craft hurtled over the water at no more than 30 feet in altitude. Weighing in at 544 tons, the EKRANOPLAN was longer than the Spruce Goose and could carry over 130 tons of troops or cargo. As late as the 1990s, the Soviet and Russian forces operated a militarized version of this craft. Equipped with all sorts of sensors and holding 6 anti-ship missiles on its back, this version of the strange EKRANOPLAN confused American observers when they first saw it. That said, despite being fast and rather intimidating looking, this plane wasn't maneuverable and would have been a sitting duck in any war. Maybe that's why NATO nicknamed it the Duck. Airbus A380. For years, the king of the sky when it came to passenger planes was the Boeing 747. After all, it was the first wide-body airliner ever built, and its partial second deck made it stand out visually next to any other plane at the airport. For 30 years, this was the case until the Airbus A380 arrived on the scene. This European jumbo jet beats the 747 everywhere except its cruising speed and length. The Airbus's wings are longer, its second deck runs the full length of the plane, and it can fly further. If both planes are configured to hold the maximum number of passengers, the A380 wins outright with around 860 to the 747's 660. But in terms of weight, the A380 really shines. You see, this massive plane breaks the scales with an empty weight of 276 tons. That's around 50 tons more than the newest version of the 747. In terms of maximum takeoff weight, the A380 is the undisputed champion at 575 tons. Except for the record-breaking AN-225, that's more than any other plane we've shown you in this video. Incredibly, Airbuses aren't just sitting around with the A380s either. They plan to launch stretched and enlarged versions of this giant sometime in the near future. That means all those photoshopped images of multi-deck A380s we've seen online might not be that unrealistic. So, do you know which active airline route is currently the biggest in terms of distance and time in the air? The answer is Qatar Airways Flight QR921 from Auckland, New Zealand to Doha, Qatar. This non-stop flight takes an incredible 17.5 hours to complete and covers a distance of 9,025 miles. Let's hope the seats on that flight are very comfy. Well, our time at this air show is at an end. We hope you found this interesting and a bit awe-inspiring. Thanks for watching. Please check out our friends at The Wacky. They make awesome list videos that will keep you entertained for hours. Don't forget to subscribe if you like their videos. We'll be sure to see you next time. Bye-bye for now.